Lawyers. Have you ever done a case you secretly hoped you would lose, and why? I'm not a lawyer, but when I was in 4th grade, my mom and my dad had a case against each other in child custody. I don't know who started it because they still blame each other. I'm 17, I don't remember much, but I do remember when I was going to talk to the court psychologist alone. My mom had me practice what to tell them before I went there, like it was a school test. She said things like, "No, you can't say it like that sounds weird." When I said, "Mom always yells loudly at Dad for a long time every time she picks me up there," and explained to me that it was a discussion between them too about other things. Also, she asked me if I felt safe at home, and I answered no because of the unreasonable yelling and screaming. She yelled and screamed at me. Maybe not so important, not the story, but she manipulated me, borrowed $1,400 at 14,000 NOK from my account to run the case, and won. I did not see my dad for a long time, and have still just seen him a few times a year since that. He has told me that Mom went to the court to take from him all custody, and I believed him. I moved out 1.5 years ago and have not seen much of my mom either. I can't wait till I'm 18 next month and get access to the court documents. I hate them both for what I had to go through. Living with mental cruelty for the next 6 years with my mom did not help much at all. I still cry when I talk to her, when I hear loud sounds. I never feel good enough at anything because she told me I wasn't. Now I'm going to a psychologist on my own initiative, because Mom would not let me when I was younger, and I hope to sort some things out. The cruel people in the court can be worse outside the court. You're really strong, and I'm sorry you had to go through that. Story 2. I worked at an intellectual property law firm, and I was handling a client who was legitimately trying to get away with trademark squatting. He would get international brands trademarked in his name, and as soon as the brand tried to obtain registrations for their marks in India, or use their trademark in India, he would file a suit against them for IP theft and then later sell the trademarks to them at an exorbitant price in exchange for withdrawing the suit. On top of actually committing IP theft, he was an entitled little prick, calling us associates up at odd hours demanding last-minute changes to drafts before filing. He created a WhatsApp group especially so he could text the entire team with absolutely redundant queries, often asking us to include completely irrelevant information about him as his various brands, because he had filed multiple suits against multiple brands. For a long time, I was handling all of his trademark matters, and I hated myself for being his lawyer. Another one, guy challenged those speed photo radar machines. I agreed with all his arguments and hated them too, but still argued against him and won. A few years later, I got my first speeding ticket from one of them and wanted to challenge it too. I would probably just recycle his excellent arguments, but now it's a losing battle. But the most recent one was a breach of contract case where my client, defendant, verbally amended several provisions of the contract, deliverables and scope of work. The claimant followed the changes in good faith, costing millions. During the last leg of milestone payments, my client refused to pay, claiming that changes were made at no cost. It ended in settlement. The client was cocky during the entire process. The claimant was an honest old man who was managing his family's firm. It was his son's first major transaction as heir to the business, and it cost their business millions. When you're young and new to practice, you have the idealism that you will defend people who aren't treated fairly. Several years down the road, you realize it's really a gamble because you never really know how things really are. Story 3. Several clients come to mind. First, it was a life insurance policy. The mother, who took out the policy, had done a number of things that caused the policy to lapse. A few years later, she quickly passed after being diagnosed with terminal cancer. She sued to enforce the policy. Her estate continued the lawsuit after she passed. Legally, she was wrong, and my client, the insurer, was right. She screwed up and let the policy lapse, so my client didn't deserve to pay out $1 million. But she had young kids, and the dad was disabled and had a low-paying job, so I felt for them. In the end, we settled for an amount higher than warranted, given the risks involved taking it to trial, i.e., the insurance company took a sympathetic view of the situation. It was a sad case all around. Second, her presented a guy at trial who had roughed up his girlfriend. He was a loser, and the trial was more about what the punishment should be than whether he had done it. Jury was out for way too long. When they gave the verdict, it was not guilty. I was astounded. Must be some kind of great lawyer. But no, one of the women in the jury held out, insisting he couldn't have done it in the face of overwhelming evidence of guilt. After the acquittal, we visited the jury to get feedback about the trial. Judge, prosecutors, and I wandered into the jury room, and everyone's eyes were on this woman. She asked to meet my client. She had fallen in love with him at first sight from the jury box. I told her no, I couldn't do that to her, but his name was there to be known. And I think she got in touch with the guy later, but I really hope she didn't. Guy was an animal. Third, I had a client with a protective order against her ex-husband, and the guy wanted to come get his belongings with some deputies along to make sure he stayed out of trouble. The husband made the motion to go get his stuff, and I was there to oppose it. It was so unreasonable to not rip the band-aid off and just part ways, but she insisted on making this as rough as possible for the guy. I won when the judge suggested a clever idea to make things work logistically, but tediously, for the parties, but I really felt for the guy. He just wanted to take his stuff and I had to be there to take him down. Lastly, not a losing case, but wishing the ground would swallow me up. I was used to working in family law, so I would turn up to court and work with kids during divorce cases. One case, I had to deal with a little girl and had to explain to her what the judge would ask her, which would be choosing which parent they would want to live with. So my way of explaining it was, think about who you would have the most fun with. Like, I go ice skating, so who would most likely take you ice skating? The little girl was asked by the judge who she wanted to live with, and in front of everyone pointed at me and said, "I want to live with that lady. She goes ice skating." I felt my boss's eyes burn through the back of my head. Ground, swallow me up, please. I don't know if that last one's adorable or sad. Story 4. I used to be an insurance defense attorney in-house for a big insurance company, and this happened to me all the time. It was usually because the facts and evidence would show that our defendant was at fault for something, but the insurance adjuster insisted that we fight it. I would do my best to explain to the adjuster why the evidence or law was against us, usually after I'd had time to gather the evidence and take plaintiff's depositions so I had the full picture. But at the end of the day, I had to proceed until or unless I was instructed to settle. 2 sticks out in my mind. Number 1, case involved defending a driver who sped around the corner and hit pedestrians crossing the street. I had to argue that the injuries weren't that severe because nothing was actually broken. Number 2, case involved fighting our own insured client who had been in a hit-and-run accident. It was later discovered that the other driver had been on hard substances when he ran the stop sign and plowed into the insured client. He had no insurance, so the client needed us, her own insurance company, to pay for her medical bills, but I was instructed to fight her on it in every possible way. Minor accident, not that hurt, bills inflated, she's young so she'll be fine, etc. It all made me feel awful. The good news is that I have now switched over to the plaintiff or claimant side, and I'm so much happier. I can at least use everything I learned from being in insurance defense to help my clients. Story 5. I used to be a prosecutor. Never once had a case where I wanted to lose or where I thought the person I was prosecuting was not guilty. However, some really minor crimes get prosecuted, so there was a lot where I thought, I would be happy to drop the case completely, even though they're guilty, to save public time and money because we're really not achieving much by punishing them. But now I'm a criminal defense attorney. I hate the state and all the criminal justice system stands for, so I've never hoped my clients would lose. I'll walk in a guilty client of any charge with a smile on my face. There are cases where my clients are so unrealistic in their expectations they're setting themselves up to get hammered, and I'm not going to be very sympathetic to them when it happens, but that's the closest to hoping they'll lose I'll ever get. Story 6. Defense attorney. Mix of retained clients and contract work with a state public defender's office when they have conflicts. All the time, child defense where the evidence is overwhelming and the client wants a trial. Sometimes they want a trial because they're psychopaths, sometimes because they're so ashamed they're in denial, and sometimes as a coping mechanism. It's easier to blame the victim, jury, cops, lawyers, and the judge than admit you did that to a child. My job isn't to like my client, or to lie for them. It's to be the gatekeeper. If the state wants a human to pass away in prison, then they have to follow the law. They need to legally present their evidence, follow the rules of evidence, and prove every element of every offense. No matter the guilt of my client, screw them if they don't prove their case. They have detectives, their own investigators, technology before trial, i.e. celebrating crime labs, technology at trial, smart boards, experts, etc., friendly former prosecutors as judges, material witness warrants, second chairs, law clerks, and public perception on their side. This is the right answer. If your client is guilty as sin and the prosecution fails, it's not your fault. Anyway, since you're already halfway through the video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel so you wouldn't miss out on any of my upcoming videos. Story 7. Obligatory, not a lawyer, but a law student. My professors are both former prosecutors. They said that a lot of lawyers, particularly in the criminal world, have a lot of cases that they either don't care or hope to lose. For example, if you're a public defender and you're defending some sort of creep, etc., you really hope they lose or at least don't walk. Public defenders absolutely have the crappiest job in law enforcement. You get assigned to defend a creep, and sadly, many times an uninformed public will associate you with defending him and his behavior. A lot of guys being defended by a PD are staring down the barrel of a lot of time, and their win is a favorable plea deal. So many PDs hope their clients do lose in the fact that they will still end up doing time. A PD is there, at least in the USA, to make sure a defendant's rights are protected and to make sure law enforcement follows proper procedures. On the prosecution side, there are sometimes pressures from the public, victims, etc., to get a conviction on someone, especially in a particularly nasty case. My professor said that many times like this are smaller cases where they're thinking, this really isn't a big deal, but outside pressures are forcing me to prosecute, and they hope that the guy can walk. So yes, some lawyers do want to lose, unless they're getting paid on contingency, and they absolutely want to win. Story 8. Fresh out of law school, I was working as a public defender. My guy was an unrepentant DUI who made the roads more dangerous for all of us. He got into a non-injury accident and the police took over an hour to arrive. The prosecutors called well-meaning but incredibly stupid people as witnesses. I gave my guy the best defense I could by making the witnesses look confused and at fault, and by suggesting that it was possible that my guy was so stressed out by the accident that he started drinking after the fact to calm his nerves. He didn't testify himself, and there was no way to prove he was drinking before the accident. He got off, and about a month later, I quit. Next one, I used to do plaintiff's work in credit card debt collection cases. Yes, I was that a-hole. One time we were suing a guy for $3,000. He had some type of cancer of the throat and had one of his jawbones removed. He was in really bad shape. Prior to the hearing, the guy told me he quit paying when his wife left as she couldn't deal with his cancer. Also, his church had collected all they could to help him, $1,000 in cash. Also, he said he was judgment-proof, which means he's so poor that there was no way my client would ever see any money from him. Extremely common. I called back to the office with his proposed $1,000 to satisfy the debt in full, and my boss said, "I don't give a damn about his jawbone, tell him $2,000 or no deal." The trial was brutal. He broke down crying when I got him to admit he intentionally didn't pay his credit card bills due to his medical bills. He was clearly broken. I pitied the guy so much, but still did my job and won. We got the full $3,000 in our judgment. By the way, our client was a third-party debt buyer, meaning they bought the debt for 2 cents or $1 of debt. This means that our client was rewarded $3,000 plus court costs, plus attorney's fees for something they paid $60 for and will never be able to collect on. Story 9. I represented a company when there was infighting among the partners. A few of the partners came to me with a plan to buy out another partner. However, this plan was essentially a way to screw this person over. I'm not sure if they thought I wasn't smart enough to figure it out, but when I called them out on it, they owned it and said that their plan was to dupe him into taking an offer and then screwing him. I pushed for an amicable resolution, i.e. a fair deal, and they went along with that for a while. The partner they were trying to buy out was not willing to leave without negotiating. My clients didn't want to hang around. They fired me and are now with someone else. I know the attorney they went to, and I can't imagine they're crossing the unethical line I wouldn't cross. The sad thing is that I really respected these folks, but they clearly did not have any respect for me or their partner. It was gross. Another one, I prosecuted 2 cases against a defendant for substance possession. They were slam dunks. Guys got arrested by the same officer at the same location and made the same admission. It was literally the same trial. He had several priors and faced a minimum of 2 consecutive prison sentences of 10 years each. He faced 20 years. I hoped he would be acquitted because A, that is a freaking insane amount of prison time for a small amount of substances. B, he was a vet who was injured in combat. And C, he was relatively young and had to buy a colostomy bag. My a-hole boss wouldn't allow me to deviate from the office policy plea offer. Defendant goes to trial and is quickly found guilty. He should have testified because I wouldn't have objected to anything. The kicker was that when the first verdict was read, he let out a long, loud fart. It was the saddest fart I've ever heard. He ended up getting 10 years total because the judge ran them concurrently. After that, I got chewed out by my officer for not arguing with the judge that he had to run them consecutively. Leave that firm. Story 10. 2 times when I was not quite a lawyer but doing work experience or student. Creep in court after police found indecent images on his computer. Wanted him to go straight to prison just off of that. I worked at my university's pro bono clinic. We received a request from a convicted creep who was already serving a prison sentence to review his case file to see if he could appeal the length of the sentences on the grounds that he had been sentenced under the wrong sentencing guidelines. Conducted an interview in prison with him and my supervisor. Was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. We thankfully couldn't assist. He was polite and, to my naive surprise at the age of 20, likable. Took a long time for me to reconcile those feelings against what I knew he had done. Counterbalance. Work experience at a criminal firm. Defendant was a British veteran who had served in Northern Ireland, became substance dependent and spiraled into a cycle of criminal behaviors. Clearly was suffering from PTSD and other mental health issues. Was in court for actual bodily harm and was pleading guilty. I, for reasons surpassing understanding, ended up in the interview suite along with him. I'll never forget how he broke down and described to me how he knew his life was out of control but couldn't seem to stop or break the cycle. How he so desperately wished he hadn't ended up back here and how he'd essentially watched his whole life destroyed. He was crying. I had no idea what to say or do, but I desperately hope he got the help he needed. Those experiences combined were enough to put me off ever practicing criminal law. Story 11. I worked at a civil firm and our biggest client for a while was a real estate investor who was the most unpleasant a-hole I've ever met. His favorite scheme was buying distressed properties. Translation, unlivable crap holes, at foreclosure sales, selling them on credit to people who couldn't afford to purchase a house any other way, waiting for the buyer to fix the place up with their own money, and then finding an excuse to foreclose on them so he could buy the place back and sell it for more to somebody else. As you can imagine, this is wildly illegal and got him sued by many people. Trying to defend this indefensible dirtbag against the people he screwed was a nightmare, but I desperately needed a job. We dropped him as a client when he stopped paying his bills, and I hope he winds up behind bars or bankrupt. Another one, not me but my friend, used to be a plaintiff's personal injury attorney, and he told me the story today about how he lost his client some money. The client was trying to use his kid to get money from a car accident. Didn't just take the kid to the ER, he took the kid to a chiropractor. Tried to act like the kid was really hurt. Pro tip, kids don't get the kinds of soft tissue injuries that adults and especially the elderly can get, so my friend does some extra negotiating and gets most of the settlement money paid to the kid. His client doesn't realize until after the papers were signed that most of his money was going to sit in the court's registry and go to his kid when he turns 18. He got angry and my friend was like, "I thought that's what you wanted. I got a lot of money for your kid's injuries." Story 12. Doesn't happen often, but when it does, it's usually because the client didn't take my advice. Maybe the client thought he could skip a certain step in a transaction to save money, usually, or time, same thing. In those cases, I'm rooting for it to come back and bite them in the rear. Sometimes it does. Sometimes there are no consequences. You win some, you lose some. Or if a client doesn't pay his bill, I secretly hope he gets in a situation where he suddenly appreciates my value. Or in other words, I hope he needs me again real soon so that he'll pay up, and I can ask for advance fees due to past poor payment behavior. Speaking of, if I'm working a case where a client has unreasonable demands or expectations, and I just don't want to do it, but I have to because reasons, I just bill the hell out of them. Some folks pay for the privilege of being a jerk. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.